Clara Dawson had always loved the quiet life. Her ranch, tucked away in the rolling hills of rural Montana, was more than just a piece of land. It was her home, her sanctuary, and her pride. Every day she woke up to the golden glow of sunrise, spilling over acres of open fields where her cattle grazed peacefully under wide-open skies. The air smelled of fresh grass and earth, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves, chirping birds, and the occasional moo of one of her cows. It was the kind of place that made you feel alive, grounded, and connected to something bigger than yourself. But all good things have their challenges, and Clara's peaceful existence came with its own set of headaches. One crisp autumn morning, as she sipped her coffee on the porch, an envelope arrived in the mail. At first glance, it looked harmless enough, a plain white envelope with the logo of the local homeowners association stamped neatly on the top left corner. But when Clara opened it, her stomach dropped. Inside was a letter informing her that a group of hunters had been given permission to hunt deer on adjacent private property. The problem? That so-called adjacent private property included parts of her ranch. Her heart raced as she read through the details. How could this happen? She hadn't signed anything, hadn't agreed to any such arrangement. And who exactly gave these strangers permission to wander onto her land? As if sensing trouble brewing, her dog, Max, trotted over and nudged her hand, looking up at her with concerned eyes. Clara sighed heavily, scratching behind his ears before grabbing her phone. She needed answers and fast. The first call she made was to the HOA office. After navigating through what felt like endless automated menus, she finally got hold of someone who sounded vaguely human. A woman with a clipped tone answered, introducing herself as Karen Wilkins, head of the HOA board. Clara explained this situation, her voice steady but firm. "This is my property we're talking about," she said. "I didn't give anyone permission to come here." Karen's response was dismissive. "Oh, don't worry about it," she said breezily. "It's just some harmless hunting. They'll stay out of your way. Your cows won't even notice." Clara clenched her jaw. Harmless? Did Karen even know how unpredictable animals could be? Her bulls weren't exactly the type to sit back and watch strangers traipse across their territory. But before Clara could argue further, Karen cut her off. "Look, everything's been approved. There's nothing to worry about." Frustrated but not ready to give up, Clara decided to pay Karen a visit in person. Driving down the winding country roads, she rehearsed what she'd say. Surely, face to face, Karen would understand the gravity of the situation. When she pulled into Karen's driveway, she was greeted by a manicured lawn and a house that screamed suburban perfection. Neat hedges, flower pots lining the porch, and a shiny SUV parked out front. Karen answered the door wearing designer sunglasses perched atop her head and holding a cup of tea. She smiled thinly as Clara introduced herself, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I already told you," Karen said after Clara explained her concerns again. "It's all taken care of." "You're overreacting?" "Overreacting?" Clara bit back a retort, reminding herself to stay calm. She tried one last time. "My bulls, they're territorial. If they feel threatened, they might charge. People could get hurt." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, setting her teacup down with a clink. "Your bulls aren't going to attack anyone," she scoffed. "Honestly, it's just a few hunters. They'll be gone before you even realize they were there." With that, she turned and walked back inside, leaving Clara standing on the doorstep, fuming. On the drive home, Clara replayed the conversation in her mind, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Who did Karen think she was, brushing off her concerns? Like they were nothing? This wasn't just about rules or permissions, it was about safety. Those hunters had no idea what they were walking into. Clara's bulls were massive, powerful creatures, and while they usually kept to themselves, they didn't tolerate intrusions lightly. She'd seen Titan, the biggest of the bunch, charge at a tractor once just because it got too close to the fence. What would he do to a group of armed strangers? By the time she reached her ranch, Clara knew she couldn't rely on Corinne to fix this mess. She had to take matters into her own hands. Parking her truck near the main gate, she noticed tire tracks leading onto her property. Sure enough, when she followed them, she found a small encampment set up near the edge of her land. Tents, coolers, and camouflage gear littered the area, and 3 men stood nearby, chatting casually as if they owned the place. One of them spotted her approaching and waved lazily. Clara forced a tight smile, parking her truck and stepping out. "Hi," she called out, trying to sound friendly despite the storm brewing inside her. "I'm Clara Dawson. This is my ranch." The tallest of the 3 men stepped forward, extending a hand. "Rick," he said with a grin. "Nice to meet you. We're here for the hunt. Heard there's some good game around these parts." Clara nodded, shaking his hand briefly. "Yeah, about that." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "You're actually trespassing. This isn't public land, it's mine. And I've got to warn you, my bulls, they're not exactly fans of visitors." Rick chuckled, clearly unfazed. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll steer clear of your cows. We're just here for the deer." He patted the rifle slung over his shoulder, adding, "Besides, we can handle ourselves." Clara wanted to scream. Handle themselves? Against a herd of charging bulls? Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain composed. "Suit yourself," she said coolly. "But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, she turned and walked back to her truck, leaving the hunters to their preparations. As she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that disaster was looming just around the corner. The next morning, Clara woke up early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. She poured herself a cup of strong black coffee and sat on her porch, staring out at the fields. The ranch was quiet, too quiet. Her mind kept circling back to the hunters. They were out there somewhere, probably already setting up for the day. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to end well. No matter how many times she replayed Corinne's dismissive words or Rick's casual confidence in her head, it didn't sit right. Something was bound to go wrong. After finishing her coffee, Clara decided to take a drive around the property. She wanted to make sure the hunters weren't straying too close to the herd. Titan, her biggest bull, was particularly protective of his space. He'd been with her since he was a calf, and while he was usually calm, she knew better than anyone that he had a temper when provoked. The last thing she needed was for him or any of the other bulls to feel threatened by strangers wandering where they didn't belong. As she drove along the dirt roads that crisscrossed her land, Clara spotted movement near the far edge of the pasture. Sure enough, it was the hunters. They were huddled together, checking their gear and chatting animatedly. From a distance, they looked harmless enough, just 3 men bundled up in camouflage jackets, rifles slung over their shoulders. But as Clara got closer, she noticed something that made her stomach sink. One of them was standing dangerously close to the fence line, right where the bulls liked to graze. She slowed down, pulling her truck to a stop a few yards away. Rolling down the window, she called out, "Hey, you're getting awfully close to my cattle." Rick turned toward her, squinting against the sunlight. "Morning," he said with a wave. "We're just scoping things out. Don't worry, we're staying clear of your cows." Clara shook her head, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "That's what I'm worried about. You're practically on top of them. My bulls, they don't like people messing around near their territory." Another hunter, shorter and stockier than Rick, laughed. "Relax, lady. We know what we're doing. These guys are pros." He gestured to himself and his companions, flashing a cocky grin. "Besides, how much trouble can a couple of cows be?" Clara bit back a sharp retort. "Cows? Did they even realize they were dealing with bulls massive, muscular animals that weighed more than a small car? She glanced past them, scanning the field. The herd was grazing peacefully for now, but she could see Titan watching from a distance. His broad shoulders and towering horns made him look almost regal, but Clara knew better. That calm demeanor could turn explosive in seconds if someone crossed the invisible boundary he'd claimed as his own. "You really need to listen to me," Clara said firmly, leaning out the window. "If those bulls feel threatened, they will charge. And trust me, you do not want to be on the receiving end of that." Rick shrugged, clearly unimpressed. "We'll keep our distance, okay? No need to get worked up." Worked up? Clara felt her blood boil but forced herself to stay calm. Arguing with them wasn't going to change their minds. Instead, she gave them one final warning. "Fine. But remember I told you so." With that, she rolled up the window and drove off, leaving the hunters to their preparations. Back at the house, Clara paced nervously. She tried calling Karen again, hoping to reason with her one last time, but the call went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, she left a terse message. "Karen, this is serious. Those hunters are putting themselves and my animals at risk. If something happens, it's on you." Hanging up, she sighed deeply. There was nothing else she could do. The hunters were here, and short of physically dragging them off her property, she had no way to stop them. Later that afternoon, Clara decided to check on the herd herself. She grabbed a pair of binoculars and climbed into her at TV, driving out to the pasture. As she approached, she saw the bulls clustered together near the fence, their massive forms silhouetted against the late afternoon light. Titan stood slightly apart from the others, his head lowered as he chewed lazily on a patch of grass. Clara parked the ATV a safe distance away and stepped out, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Through the binoculars, she scanned the area beyond the fence. The hunters were still there, though they'd moved farther into the woods. She could see flashes of movement between the trees as they adjusted their positions. For now, they seemed to be keeping their promise to stay away from the cattle. Still, Clara couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her gut. Even if they thought they were being careful, accidents happened. All it would take was one careless step or one loud noise for everything to spiral out of control. As she watched, one of the hunters raised his rifle and fired a shot into the air. It echoed across the landscape, startling a flock of birds into flight. Clara flinched, her heart skipping a beat. Then she froze. Across the field, Titan's ears perked up. His massive head lifted, and he stared directly at the source of the sound. For a moment, everything was still, the kind of eerie silence that comes before a storm. And then it happened. Titan let out a low bellow, deep and guttural, that sent shivers down Clara's spine. In an instant, the rest of the herd responded, their heads snapping up in unison. Clara's breath caught in her throat. This was bad. Very bad. She jumped back into the ATV and gunned the engine, racing toward the fence line. By the time she reached it, the scene unfolding before her was pure chaos. The hunters had realized their mistake too late. One of them had accidentally stepped too close to the fence, startling the herd. Now Titan led the charge, his massive hooves pounding the ground like thunder as he barreled straight toward the intruders. The other bulls followed close behind, their collective roar shaking the very earth beneath Clara's feet. From her vantage point, Clara could see the panic spreading among the hunters. They scrambled to grab their gear, dropping rifles and backpacks in their haste to flee. Trees splintered as the bulls crashed through the underbrush, pursuing the terrified men with relentless fury. Tents collapsed, coolers flew, and shouts filled the air as the hunters desperately tried to escape. Clara gripped the handlebars of the ATV, torn between horror and disbelief. She'd warned them. She'd begged them to listen. But instead of heeding her advice, they'd underestimated both her and her bulls. Now they were paying the price, As the stampede raged on, Clara couldn't help but feel a strange mix of satisfaction and dread. Satisfaction because they'd finally learned their lesson, and dread because she knew this wasn't going to end quietly. The chaos erupted faster than anyone could have anticipated. One moment, the hunters were standing near the edge of the woods, adjusting their gear and scanning the trees for deer. The next, all hell broke loose. The sharp crack of a rifle firing into the air had been enough to startle Titan, Clara's massive lead bull. His reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. Titan's deep bellow reverberated across the pasture, a sound so primal it sent chills down Clara's spine even from a distance. Within seconds, the entire herd joined in, their collective energy transforming the peaceful field into a scene straight out of a nightmare. Hooves pounded the ground like rolling thunder as the bulls surged forward, their powerful bodies cutting through the grass with frightening speed. It wasn't just Titan leading the charge. The whole herd moved as one, united by instinct and fury. Clara watched from her at TV, frozen for a split second before adrenaline kicked in. She revved the engine and sped closer to the fence line, hoping to somehow intervene or at least get a better view of what was happening. What she saw when she arrived made her heart race even faster. The hunters were in full-blown panic mode. Their earlier confidence had vanished completely, replaced by sheer terror as they scrambled to escape the raging animals bearing down on them. One of the men tripped over his own feet, tumbling onto the ground as he tried to grab his rifle. Another dropped his backpack mid-run, not bothering to look back as he bolted toward the tree line. Rick, the leader of the group, shouted orders that no one seemed to hear or care about over the deafening roar of the stampede. Trees splintered and branches snapped as the bulls crashed through the underbrush, closing the gap between themselves and the intruders with terrifying efficiency. From Clara's perspective, it almost looked comical the way the hunters stumbled and fell over each other in their desperation to flee. But there was nothing funny about the danger they were in. These weren't docile farm animals. These were wild, territorial beasts weighing thousands of pounds apiece. A single swipe of Titan's horns could send a grown man flying or worse. And Titan didn't seem interested in slowing down anytime soon. As the herd closed in, the hunters abandoned any semblance of strategy. They ran blindly, tripping over roots and rocks, their camouflage outfits doing little to help them blend into the chaos. One of them dove behind a fallen log, thinking it might offer some protection, only to realize too late that it wouldn't stop a charging bull. He scrambled back to his feet just in time to avoid being trampled, his face pale with fear. Meanwhile, Titan remained relentless. His massive frame plowed through anything in his path, scattering equipment and sending tents flying like ragdolls. The hunter's campsite, once neatly arranged, was now a disaster zone. Coolers spilled open, spilling cans of soda and snacks onto the dirt. Rifles lay abandoned, forgotten in the frenzy. Even their truck, parked haphazardly near the edge of the field, wasn't safe. One of the smaller bulls rammed into its side, leaving a dent that would serve as a permanent reminder of the day they'd underestimated Clara's warnings. Clara stayed at a safe distance, torn between shock and disbelief. Part of her wanted to intervene, to yell or wave her arms to distract the bulls, but she knew better than to put herself in harm's way. Instead, she gripped the handlebars of her ATV tightly, watching as the hunters disappeared into the woods, pursued relentlessly by the angry herd. The sound of crashing foliage and panicked shouts faded into the distance, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. When it finally seemed like the worst was over, Clara exhaled deeply, her hands trembling as she turned off the ATV engine. Her mind raced with questions. Were the hunters okay? Had anyone been hurt or worse? She felt a pang of guilt, despite knowing this wasn't her fault. She'd done everything she could to warn them. Still, seeing the aftermath of the stampede, the wreckage strewn across her property left her feeling uneasy. She climbed off the ATV and walked cautiously toward the site where the hunters had set up camp. The damage was staggering. Broken equipment littered the ground, and the smell of spilled fuel hung heavy in the air. Pieces of clothing, a jacket here, a boot there, were scattered among the debris, evidence of how quickly the hunters had fled. Clara shook her head, muttering under her breath, "I told them." Her thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of voices. Looking up, she saw the hunters stumbling back onto the road, muddy and disheveled, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Rick led the group, limping slightly and clutching a twisted ankle. When he spotted Clara, he stopped dead in his tracks, his expression a mix of shame and anger. You didn't tell us they'd do that," Rick stammered, pointing accusingly toward the field. His voice trembled, betraying the bravado he'd shown earlier. "Those things are monsters." Clara crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "I did warn you," she said evenly, multiple times. "You chose not to listen." Rick opened his mouth to argue but thought better of it. Instead, he glanced around at his companions, who were busy catching their breath and inspecting their injuries. None of them met Clara's gaze. The reality of the situation had sunk in, and they knew she was right. For a moment, no one spoke. The hunters stood silently, taking in the destruction around them. Finally, one of them muttered, We'll pack up and leave. Right now." Clara nodded, satisfied. "Good idea. And don't come back." As the hunters began gathering what was left of their gear, Clara took a step back, letting out a long sigh. The adrenaline coursing through her veins started to fade, replaced by a strange sense of vindication. Yes, the hunters had gotten exactly what they deserved, but at what cost? Her ranch was a mess, and she still had to deal with the fallout from this ordeal. Driving back toward the house, Clara couldn't help but think about how quickly things had spiraled out of control. One careless decision, Karen granting permission without consulting her, had led to this disaster. Now it was time to hold someone accountable. But first, she needed to clean up the mess and make sure her bulls were calm and safe. After all, they were the real heroes of the story today. The next few days felt surreal to Clara. The hunters were gone, having packed up their battered gear and hightailed it out of her ranch as quickly as possible. But the aftermath of the stampede lingered like a storm cloud over her property. Broken equipment lay scattered across the fields, tents torn to shreds, and muddy footprints marked where the chaos had unfolded. Even Titan and the other bulls seemed restless, pacing near the fence line as if they could sense something was still off. Clara spent most of her time cleaning up the mess left behind. She loaded broken tent poles, empty soda cans, and crumpled maps into garbage bags, shaking her head at the carelessness of it all. These hunters hadn't just trespassed, they treated her land like it was theirs for the taking. And now she was stuck dealing with the consequences. It frustrated her more than she cared to admit, but what really burned inside her wasn't the physical damage. It was the arrogance that led to this whole situation in the first place. Karen's reckless decision-making gnawed at her every waking moment. How could someone so clueless hold so much power? Clara couldn't let this slide, not without holding someone accountable. She decided to take action. First, she called the HOA office again, demanding an explanation. This time, when Karen answered, there was no trace of her usual smugness. Word about the stampede had spread fast through town, thanks in part to one of the hunters posting videos online before fleeing Montana entirely. People were talking, laughing, even at how a bunch of city slickers got chased by angry bulls. The story had gone viral, complete with grainy footage of Titan leading the charge. Clara knew Karen must have seen it too because her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. "Look," Karen began, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "I understand you're upset, but accidents happen." "A stampede isn't an accident," Clara shot back, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You ignored my warnings and put people and my animals at risk. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was?" Karen hesitated, clearly flustered. "Well, I thought we were following proper procedures." "No, Karen," Clara interrupted, her patience wearing thin. "You didn't follow anything. You gave permission to strangers without checking boundaries or consulting me. That's negligence, plain and simple." There was silence on the other end of the line. For once, Karen didn't have a snappy comeback. Sensing weakness, Clara pressed. "Harder. If anyone gets hurt or worse because of this, you'll be responsible." "Is that really the legacy you want to leave as HOA president?" That last jab hit its mark. Karen stammered something about calling a meeting to discuss the matter further, but Clara hung up before she could finish. She wasn't interested in excuses anymore. It was time for accountability. The HOA held an emergency meeting 2 days later. Clara showed up armed with evidence: photos of the damaged property, screenshots of the viral video showing the hunter's frantic escape, and copies of emails proving Karen never consulted her before approving the hunt. The room buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in, some curious, others openly hostile toward Karen. Clara stood quietly in the corner, letting the murmurs build until everyone settled down. When Karen walked in, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Her usual confident demeanor was nowhere to be found, replaced by nervous fidgeting and darting glances around the room. As the meeting began, Clara let others speak first, neighbors who shared her frustration, recounting stories of how Karen's poor decisions had affected them too. One man talked about how Karen refused to address potholes on his street, while another complained about her dismissing concerns about drainage flooding during heavy rains. By the time it was Clara's turn to speak, the mood in the room was electric. She stepped forward, laying out her case calmly but firmly. "What happened on my property wasn't just a misunderstanding, it was avoidable," she said, making eye contact with each person in the room. "Karen approved access for hunters without verifying boundaries or listening to my warnings. Those hunters nearly got trampled by my bulls because of her negligence. If this can happen to me, it can happen to anyone here." Her words landed like a punch. Murmurs turned to nods of agreement, and soon others chimed in, echoing her frustrations. Karen tried to defend herself, blaming miscommunication and paperwork errors, but her arguments fell flat. No one believed her anymore. When the vote came up to remove her from the HOA board, it was unanimous. Karen resigned on the spot, her face flushed with embarrassment as she hurried out of the room. With Karen gone, Clara felt a small sense of justice served, but her work wasn't done yet. She filed a formal complaint against the HOA, detailing their failure to respect private property rights. Legal fees loomed ahead, but she didn't care. What mattered most was setting a precedent. No one should ever treat someone else's land or livelihood with such disregard again. In the weeks that followed, life on the ranch slowly returned to normal. The hunter's abandoned truck remained parked along the road for a while, serving as a grim reminder of the ordeal until the authorities towed it away. Clara reinforced her fences, adding signs warning trespassers about the dangers of disturbing her cattle. She also installed security cameras around the perimeter, determined to prevent anything like this from happening again. Her neighbors rallied around her, offering support and solidarity. Some brought food, others offered to help clean up the remaining debris. One elderly couple even gifted her a handmade quilt embroidered with the words "Stampede Squad" in bold letters, a nod to the nickname locals had given her bulls after the incident went viral. Clara laughed when she saw it, draping the quilt proudly over her couch. It was a quirky yet fitting tribute to the chaotic events that had unfolded. As for Titan and the rest of the herd, they became local legends. Neighbors joked about how the bulls had single-handedly driven off invaders, turning them into folk heroes of sorts. Kids passing by on school buses would press their faces against the windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of Titan grazing peacefully in the field. Clara couldn't help but smile whenever she watched him from her porch. He may have been stubborn and territorial, but he'd proven himself to be fiercely protective of his home and hers. Still, Clara couldn't shake the irony of it all. In a way, the hunters had gotten exactly what they deserved. They'd underestimated both her and her bulls, dismissing her warnings as paranoia. But deep down, she hoped they'd learn something valuable from the experience. Respect the land, respect the animals, and above all, respect the people who live there. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara sat on her porch with a cup of tea. Max lay curled at her feet, his tail thumping lazily against the wooden planks. She glanced out at the pasture, where Titan stood silhouetted against the fading light. His massive frame exuded strength and calmness, a stark contrast to the fury he'd unleashed just days earlier. For the first time in weeks, Clara felt truly at peace. Yes, the ordeal had been stressful, infuriating even. But it had also reminded her of something important. Her ranch wasn't just a piece of property, it was a sanctuary, a place worth protecting. And with Titan and the rest of the Stampede squad watching over it, she knew it always would be. The weeks following the hunters' chaotic exit brought a mix of emotions for Clara. There was relief. Sure, her ranch was finally quiet again, and Titan and the other bulls had settled back into their routines. But there was also lingering frustration. Every time she drove past the repaired fence or saw the indentations in the dirt where the hunter's truck had been abandoned, she was reminded of how close things had come to disaster. It wasn't just about her property anymore. It was about standing up for what was right and making sure no one else had to deal with this kind of nonsense. One crisp morning, as Clara sipped her coffee on the porch, she noticed a familiar car pulling up her driveway. At first, she thought it might be another neighbor stopping by to check on her, or maybe even someone from the HOA trying to smooth things over. Instead, out stepped Karen, looking smaller and more defeated than Clara had ever seen her. She hesitated at the edge of the driveway, clearly unsure if she should approach. Clara set her mug down and walked over, crossing her arms as she waited for Karen to speak. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Karen cleared her throat and looked up, her voice soft and hesitant. I wanted to apologize," she began, fidgeting with the strap of her purse. "What happened? It was my fault. I didn't listen to you, and I put people in danger." Clara studied her for a long moment, searching for any trace of insincerity. When she found none, she nodded slowly. "It's not me you need to apologize to," she said evenly. "Those hunters could have been seriously hurt or worse. And my animals? They don't deserve that kind of stress either." Karen winced, nodding quickly. "You're right. I know I messed up, and I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." Clara let out a slow breath, feeling some of the tension ease. Apologies were easy to give, but actions mattered more. Still, she appreciated that Karen had shown up at all. "Just make sure it doesn't happen again," she said firmly. "Not to me, not to anyone else." With that, Karen thanked her quietly and left, climbing back into her car and driving away. Clara watched her go, shaking her head slightly. Whether Karen truly understood the weight of her mistakes remained to be seen, but at least she'd taken a step toward accountability. In the months that followed, life on the ranch returned to its peaceful rhythm. The viral video of the stampede continued to circulate online, earning Clara and her bulls a strange sort of fame. Locals joked about the Stampede squad whenever they passed by, often honking their horns or waving enthusiastically. Some tourists even started showing up, hoping to catch a glimpse of Titan and his herd. Clara didn't mind too much. She turned it into an opportunity, selling homemade jams and honey at a small roadside stand near the entrance to her property. Business picked up, and she found herself chatting with visitors who were curious about the infamous bulls. But beyond the humor and lightheartedness, the incident left a lasting impact on Clara. She realized how important it was to protect not only her land but also the principles behind it: respect, responsibility, and resilience. Those values became central to her daily life. She installed better fencing, added warning signs along the perimeter, and joined a local advocacy group focused on rural property rights. Her voice carried weight now, not because of the stampede itself, but because she'd stood her ground when it mattered most. Her neighbors noticed the change in her too. Where once she might have shied away from conflict, she now spoke up confidently at community meetings, advocating for transparency and fairness within the HOA. People respected her for it, and soon she found herself surrounded by allies who shared her vision for a stronger, more united neighborhood. Titan and the rest of the bulls continued to thrive under her care. Their role in defending the ranch had earned them legendary status both locally and online. Clara often laughed when strangers asked if the bulls were still on patrol. To her, they weren't just animals. They were family, partners in maintaining the balance of her world. Watching Titan graze peacefully in the field, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. He may have been stubborn and territorial, but he'd proven himself to be fiercely loyal too. One evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the pasture, Clara sat on her porch with Max curled at her feet. She leaned back in her chair, letting the cool breeze wash over her. The ranch stretched out before her, vast and serene, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. She thought about everything that had happened, the hunters, the chaos, the lessons learned, and smiled faintly. Life had a way of testing you, but it also gave you chances to grow stronger. Max let out a soft bark, snapping her out of her thoughts. Across the field, Titan lifted his massive head, locking eyes with her for a brief moment before returning to his grazing. Clara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You did good, big guy," she said aloud, knowing he couldn't hear her but feeling like it needed to be said anyway. As darkness settled over the ranch, stars began to twinkle in the sky, reminding Clara of the endless possibilities ahead. She'd faced challenges before, and she knew there would be more to come. But with Titan and the Stampede squad by her side and her own determination guiding her, she felt ready for whatever lay around the corner. Life on the ranch wasn't always easy, but it was hers. And as long as she had breath in her lungs, she'd fight to protect it.